Welcome to the Green Wasp Removal YouTube channel. In this episode, we remove a massive German Yellowjacket nest from an old farmhouse where an elderly couple had called us for help when they found wasps chewing through their wall into their walk-in closet and then moving out into the rest of the living space where they started to get stung. We found the entry point was on the porch, so we started there. We ran a vacuum the entire time during the removal from the outside, as you see here, and we reduced all of their entry points down to one central entry point by using duct tape to direct them where we wanted them to go for all that collection. Here on the other side of the porch wall was a large walk-in closet, and they had chewed their way through the wall of that closet. As you see here, the paper from the nest that they create to cover the brood comb was just pouring out of a hole in the wall that they had chewed. And as you see this patch on the wall, that wood patch was installed by the client because they had previously had a rat living in that wall space. And the rat had also chewed its way into the closet and lived in the closet for a while, so the place was kind of a mess. But they did kill the rat ultimately, and then they put a patch over the wall. Well, after that, all of these wasps moved into the former rat nest wall cavity, and they began a very big nest in there, made quite a mess of the place. And now the elderly couple that lived in the home had wasps in their closet, and they had wasps in the adjacent room next to the closet, because the wasp would come out of the closet door, especially at night when there was lights in other rooms. And so the residents were getting stung in their own home. So as you see here, we cleaned up all of the live wasps we could find in the closet. That was the first order of business inside the living space. And then we moved over into the adjacent room, which you see here, and we started removing all of the live wasps we found there. Most of those wasps had congregated around the window of that room. So it was relatively simple to open up the blinds here and begin collecting. One of the window panes had broken a long time ago and was still in the frame of the window, and some of the wasps had crawled through some of the cracks in the broken glass and gotten inside the window between the screen and the glass, but we got them all cleaned up. Then we went back out onto the porch to see how that collection was going, and as you see here, we were getting bottles full of foragers coming back in through the porch. This is why it's important to set up your gear in such a way that you have a constant collection happening on the outside entry point, and as you begin the removal, which you see here, you have a vacuum on the inside collecting from the inside. So here we're removing the patch on the wall that had been installed by the client, and there you see a multi-layer, very busy Vespula germanica nest right there in that wall cavity. This had originally been part of the rat nest inside that wall cavity, and then the wasps came in and expanded it even further and began to chew their way into the closet as the nest grew. So this is what happens when you have a wasp nest inside a wall that isn't controlled. If you don't control it from the outside, it will expand to the point where it will begin running out of room. And once it runs out of room, the wasps have no choice but to chew into your drywall and your insulation and anything inside that wall cavity to get room to build the nest out. And as they do that, they will often chew right through the wall into your living space, and that's what happened here. As you can see, there was a lot of larvae in the nest, a lot of pupae in the nest. Pupae are larvae that have woven a silk cap over their cell and begun the pupation process into the adult wasp form. And that lasts a couple of weeks, and then they come out of that silk cap as an adult wasp. And there were many layers of brood comb that had a lot of pupae cells in them. We got here at the right time because there would have been thousands of wasps inside the living space had we not intervened when we did. Here you see us removing some of the wall material to assess the full size of the nest, and then we begin pulling brood comb out in stacks. There were probably 13 different layers of brood comb in this nest, give or take. And when you're working in an enclosed environment like this inside a closet, there's a lot of dust and debris. You don't want to breathe that. So what you see here is a full face respirator and ear protection. Everything that comes out of an old wall is toxic. Lead paint, dust, fiberglass insulation, rat dung dust, all of it. You don't want to be breathing that. And the hearing protection protects our ears from the noise of the vacuums. Here you see the first section of comb we got out and put into the bin. This was the upper part of the nest, the upper section of the nest, the first several layers. So we're just cleaning up some of the live wasps in here, just getting them collected before we move into the second part of the nest, which is down here. This was all queen cells. And so what you see here are very large cells, very large pupae, And these are the reproductive queens being born. And in a large nest, there's usually hundreds of these queens, so we were collecting all of those in the lower half of the nest. And as you look down into the nest cavity, the very last comb we're grabbing here, more queen larvae. Very large cells, very large larvae. You can see quite a bit bigger than the workers that they would produce earlier in the season. If you can imagine each one of these larvae hatching out, becoming a full-size queen, then going out and mating and starting her own nest after she hibernates in the winter, she would start her own nest in the spring and have thousands of her own wasps. By interrupting a nest like this now before it can hatch out all of those queens, you're preventing all of those future nests from being formed in the next season, which is hundreds of thousands of wasps. It's just an exponential number that you're preventing from becoming a problem in the ecosystem as an invasive species and becoming a problem for all of the local people who live in this area. German Yellowjackets, or Vespula germanica, as they're called in the scientific world, they are an invasive species here in North America. So when you can remove them and eliminate them, that is the best thing to do. Fortunately, all of ours are used for venom immunotherapy, so they go to a good cause. So let's take you back now to October 8th of 2025, and we're going to show you the entire process of how we collect the live wasps and freeze them for venom immunotherapy, through to where we pull the brood comb out of the wall and then clean up all of the debris and the wasp paper that they had built out inside that wall cavity, and finally how we patch it with cardboard to get it prepared for contractors to come and repair the drywall. We're going to show you exactly how this job is done from A to Z. So if you want to try to do it yourself, just follow along and learn. You can do this on your own if you follow the exact same procedures that we follow. We want you to learn how to do green removals. That means no toxins, no poisons, only using vacuum systems and proper tools, not leaving toxins behind in the ecosystem or in the living spaces of the clients who need help. Thanks for riding along with us. If you find the content on our channel helpful or educational or simply entertaining in any way, please remember to like, share, subscribe, and comment to let us know you're there. Enjoy the show. So here on October 8th of 2025, we were called to this farmhouse that had a huge infestation of yellowjackets chewing their way through the wall into their living space through a closet that was adjacent to this porch. So the first order of business is always going to be getting control of the entry point. That's what we're doing out here. We're setting up vacs to control the entry point. We're using a number of entrances right around the corner here. So we're just taping off some of those entrances to force them to use only the entrance that we can control and collect them from. That causes them to swarm and reorient, and in that process they get collected a little more readily. As you can see, they're starting to fill up the container pretty quickly. So this first step of just controlling the entry point, the main exit point as well that they're using on the outside of the building, that is a crucial first step because it's a way that you're going to reduce the population that you have to deal with inside the closet once you open up that space. So once we have control of the outside, we just leave that vac running for the whole job. Then we move inside to set up control in there. All right, so here we are inside the closet. The porch wall is adjacent to this space here. You can see a very active nest. Paper is just pouring out of the wall hole they've chewed through. And as you can see, there was a previous wood patch here. The residents had a rat in the wall, so this nest probably formed in the old rat nest. So that's why we're going to wear a full respirator mask as we do the removal. Old lead paint, insulation, rat dung, general toxic substances you do not want to breathe. So we'll have our respirator mask on during the whole removal. So they're just continuing to expand their nest down into this space. Fortunately, there's already a hole in the wall, so we can just remove that board and hopefully get access to the nest pretty readily without a whole lot more cutting, but we'll see. You can see males here, so they're already making a lot of reproductives, and there's probably a lot of new queens inside the nest. They made quite a mess down here where they've been digging and dropping debris. And they're kind of using this whole space as their own right now. Fortunately, there's an overhead light that makes it relatively easy to just suck them up off the light. So now that we have the outside of the building under control, we are now going to start collecting any live wasps that are inside the building. Any loose wasps anywhere in the structure. We're just going to vacuum up every one of them that we see to clean up this living space before we open the wall, before we dig out any nests. We just want to get control of the interior space. So what we're doing here is just inspecting, looking at the damage, looking at how many wasps are around, and collecting them as we see them. There was an elderly couple that lived in this home that were present during the removal in another room. One of them was pretty severely medically compromised. It's important to get these wasps under control immediately. So that was the next step we had to handle before we do anything else. So we're just going to speed up the footage here just to show you what that looked like. Cleaning up the space, getting every live wasp that was inside that closet or inside an adjacent room. And following that phase of cleanup, then we're going to open the wall and go after the nest directly. A lot of what we were finding in the immediate closet area were males that had been kicked out of the nest, which is natural this time of year. It won't be so useful for venom immunotherapy, but we're just collecting them to get them out of here for the client. Males have no stingers, no venom sacs, so they cannot be used for venom immunotherapy. So we're just collecting them to get them out of the client's living space. We can't really do anything with them as far as venom collection goes. You can see the rat traps and whatnot they had up here. So we're going to consider all of this contaminated, just in case. And get all the gear cleaned up. A lot of these are males. Some females forming mating wecks, which are groups of mating wasps. Males can't sting, and they are mostly scaredy cats. They try to run away from any danger. Rather than attempt to attack or bite, they just sort of flee. And they let the females do all the fighting. Here in the adjacent room, they have a window. So we're just going to clear up some of those that have escaped into this area here. We have a bunch up in there, so we're just going to suck them up individually, which is easy to do in a window. Looks like there's an old smashed window here, but it's not open. So we're just going to be able to contain them all easily right here. A lot of them are males. Try to leave the nest or escape danger. And they'll go out to mate this time of year. There's one stuck inside the old broken guy. A large number of the foragers here, so we're going to get this bottle frozen and then we'll set the next bottle up. Once we had collected all the live wasps from inside the closet and any adjacent rooms, we then went back out and checked on the porch entry point, and that collection bottle was already full. So we were able to stop the work for a moment, change out the bottle so that we could get this collection frozen for venom immunotherapy. And we would do this periodically throughout the job. Go out, freeze the bottle, change it out for a fresh bottle, and keep moving and continually collect the entire time we were there. And this process just significantly reduced the number of wasps we were dealing with once we got into the wall and started removing the nest. So as each bottle fills up, we pull the bottle, bring it to the vehicle, put it into the dry ice cooler and flash freeze the live specimens. Then we contain them in a special container. So as you can see, this first bottle is absolutely packed already. So we're going to get that one contained before they can overheat or run out of oxygen. So the extra tape we applied is working well. It's directing them all right toward where we need them to be collected. As you see, a lot of the foragers fly in and get sucked up immediately. Others walk past it and enter the nest, which is fine because we'll get them on the other side of the wall. But the vast majority are getting collected. We want as many to come out as possible. And we don't care if they get collected on the way out or not. It's mostly on the way in where they get collected. So once we had the outside under control and we had the interior wasps collected so everything was under control inside, it was time to begin removing some of the nest paper, as you see here. And we just used a shop vac with soap and water for that. This is not a venom immunotherapy collection. This is just simply a debris collection at this point. Due to the respirator mask, you can't hear most of the dialogue, so what we're explaining here is just that when there's a light source that we bring into the closet, we leave the overhead light off, and we leave that work light on, and they will congregate around the work light, which makes it easier to collect them as we're working. When you're doing these types of jobs in cramped spaces that are unhealthy to begin with because they're too hot, they're toxic, they're dirty, and it's best to get out of there as soon as possible. So you have to make every part of the job as efficient as you possibly can. So bringing a work light close to where you're working eliminates the need to have to vacuum up wasps from all over that closet that kept flying upward to the ceiling. Here we're removing the old wood patch on the wall that the client had installed a while ago after they had had a barn rat move into their house, into the wall cavity behind that wood patch, and then chew its way into the walk-in closet, and it lived in the walk-in closet for an extended period of time. There was a lot of rat dung and rat urine everywhere. It was a real mess. It hadn't been cleaned up much yet. This is why it's so important to use respirator masks when you're doing this kind of work in a filthy environment. What we're explaining here is once we got the screws out, we realized that they had also glued the board onto the wall, so we had to get the multi-tool out and cut away all that glue. And again, more toxic dust. This is why you must wear a respirator when you're doing demolition. You do not want that stuff in your lungs. So at this point, we had already cleaned up all of the adjacent rooms. We had gotten all the live wasps out of the living space. We had cleaned up the closet, collected all the wasps there, and we do that as we move along. Now it's time to open the wall. As you can see here, there was a significant sized nest in that wall cavity that was formerly occupied by the rat. So we knew this whole thing was going to be filthy inside with rat nest material throughout the whole cavity that we're working in the wall. So what we have here is a shop vac that just collects junk. It collects garbage. So bottom line was all of this was just demolition debris and junk. We were not going to be able to save these wasps. So we're just sucking them directly into soap and water inside a big shop vac. In an environment like this, we would not normally attempt to collect the wasps on the nest for venom immunotherapy in order to keep control of the swarm and keep the wasps out of the living space. And remember, we're working in somebody's house, in their living space. You don't want any wasps coming off that nest if you can possibly help it. And for venom immunotherapy, you have to go very slow and meticulously, and you have to collect very carefully And we just don't have time for that with a big nest in a wall in a filthy environment. It's far more efficient to just immediately get in there with a junk vac and suck everything into the junk vac, soap and water, dust, wasps, everything. So here we're explaining that as you look underneath the shelf here, where the wasp paper was, and that we had vacuumed away all that wasp paper, where they were building down into that space, we're going to have to tape off that whole area down below the shelf to keep them from fleeing down there while we're cleaning up and vacuuming, because we don't want them running down below that shelf. So we're pausing here to get some duct tape and seal off everything below the shelf. And every now and then it's good to pause anyway, because the wasps in the nest will come to you. If you just back off with the hose for a moment, they'll come right back in and fill in that space where we want them to be, where we're working. And they will keep coming out of that nest a little at a time. If you just back off, they'll refill that, and then you just vacuum them up. They'll refill it, you vacuum them up. In other words, we're drawing them in to where we want them to be from all over the nest. As they come and explore over here and they see the light and they check it out, you just suck them up. Behind this wall is an inaccessible cavity that we can't get into. So we don't want them running deeper into there while we cut up the wall and chase them around in there. What we want them to do is just what they're doing here, maintaining their nest as usual, walking level to level, coming and exploring the light that we set up in the workstation, and that way they come to us, we don't chase them around, everything works out more efficiently. So we spent a long time here on this phase of the removal because we did not want to disturb the nest comb. We didn't want to pull it out immediately when there's tons of wasps in there still in that cavity space and in between the layers. All we want to do is slowly collect them as they come to us. And remember, from the outside where the porch entry is, we have another vac going all the time. Throughout this entire process, there's another vac outside. So we're hitting them from both sides. We're hitting them from inside right here, and we're hitting them from outside as more foragers come back to the nest. They're getting vacuumed up as they try to enter through the porch. What we're trying to do is, from both sides of this nest, have 100% control of all of the population on the nest, both what's on the nest already and what's coming back to the nest from the environment out there that's hunting and resourcing and foraging and all of that. So what's happening while the tripod is holding this shot, there's a small tripod we have set up over on another shelf in the closet, and that's what's filming here. While the tripod is filming this steady shot, we're underneath this shelf, taping off all of the crevices so that the wasps can't run downward under the shelf. You see this wasp on the right of the frame trying to go down. It can't go down anymore. It can't run away because we just taped off that whole area with duct tape. And we'll show you that here in a minute. Basically, all of this area now is inaccessible to the wasps. So they're going to have to run up toward where we're vacuuming. Again, it's just control of the population to make everything more efficient and to keep the wasps from running around anywhere except where we want them. They can run toward the work light or they can get sucked up right here. Either way, we're going to get them easily within arm's reach. We're not going to chase them around.
When you have a massive nest like this, you just take your time.
What we're explaining here is that when you have a massive nest like this, you just take your time. You sit back, you relax, you let the wasps come to you through whatever access point you have. You don't disturb them any more than you have to, because then they stay on the nest. They stay right where you need them to stay. Instead of flying and swarming and flying all over the place in a panic when you start tearing up the nest, what we want is the nest to stay completely intact for as long as possible so that we can suck the wasp right off the comb. This is especially important if you're dealing with a very aggressive species. In this case, we're not. We're dealing with German Yellowjackets. That's the least aggressive of all the Yellowjackets we deal with. But if this was Eastern or Southern Yellowjackets or Flavipilosa, something more aggressive in their defensive response, you would absolutely want to be in control of as much of that population as much of the time as possible. So we just do that on every species, and it seems to work pretty well. You keep that nest intact as long as you can.
so good. Just keeping it up. Keep it steady.
So you'll notice we wear a full face respirator with a full face lens on it. So we don't have to wear safety goggles or anything. It's all covered by one respirator. And we're wearing hearing protection because the vacs are extremely loud. You don't want to listen to that all day while you're doing this job. So the idea would be protect your ears, protect your lungs, protect your eyes and your face while you're doing any of this work. And it's hot, it's uncomfortable, so you just get through it as fast as you can and as efficiently as possible. And you want to make sure that you're doing everything in your power to do everything ergonomically correct so that you're not beating yourself up doing this work. So here we're going 4 times fast forward just to show you the process. As you can see, you suck up at what you can reach, then you allow more of them to come in, then you suck up more of what you can reach, you allow more of them to come in, and you just keep that process up over and over again. And at one point we could keep the hose down in the lower part of the nest here, as you see, and you could just feel them coming up into the lower part of the nest and entering the tube. You don't have to chase them around. You can feel them bouncing off the hose as they're collected. So you know, even though you can't see them, that they're crawling upwards on the nest, and everything on the lower part of that nest is being collected just as readily as everything else, just by keeping the hose there. So we did this periodically throughout this part of the removal, where we would just leave the hose in place as you see it here, and this is still 4x fast forward. So we were feeling dozens of them from the lower part of the nest being collected, even though we couldn't see them. We could feel them in the hose. And as you can see in this footage, there's fewer and fewer in this population on the nest, and that's the idea, is we are controlling that flow of wasps. So we knew, even though we couldn't see it, that there was going to be several layers that are lower than what you see here of this nest. So we knew there'd be some above what you see and some below what you see. So it was just a matter of taking the time to let the wasps get collected and not trying to rush the process, because you'd end up spending way more time trying to collect them from all over that cavity space. Whereas in this method of just leaving the nest intact, they'll come to you, and as you see, it's quite efficient. We have wiped out the vast majority of wasps on this nest already.
There's a lot of new queens in the nest.
Here we're discussing the fact that we've seen many new queens on this nest. It's the time of year when they're making their reproductives, so there were a lot of males, a lot of new queens, and again, when you dismantle the nest prematurely, those new queens are pre-programmed to flee the nest and fly all over the place. They just fly away because they're trying to go out and mate and start a new nest after they hibernate all winter. So the idea is, if you keep the nest intact, you prevent those new queens from doing their instinctual flight away from the nest as soon as the nest is disturbed. They just keep wandering around the nest comb during this method, and you just suck them up as you see them. So as we move in on close-up here, you see how when the nest remains intact, the wasps just go about their business. You're not tearing a place apart, you're not causing them to flee or fly. They're just walking around doing what they normally do. Some are repairing the paper on the nest, some are engaging with the larvae on the nest to either feed the larvae or get fed by the larvae, because they do a two-way feeding called trophallaxis. So some are doing that. Some are actually maintaining the larvae that have been pulled from their cells, or if the cell is damaged, by instinct they will pull those larvae out and they will often eat them and feed that protein to the surviving larvae. Because once the cell is destroyed, the larvae can't be saved, so they often will use that larvae as food. Others are just rambling because they're trying to figure out what's happening. They're coming to the light, they're trying to assess the situation, but what they're not doing is fleeing all over the cavity space in the wall, and that's the idea. We want as many as possible to stay right here on the nest for as long as possible, so we can just leisurely pick them right off the nest. And that's what we've been doing, and that's what we'll keep doing as long as there's more activity on that nest. We're not going into the wall. We're just collecting. Here we're just taking a minute to observe the wasps. It's interesting to watch what each one of them's up to look in between the layers. The spaces between the combs that beekeepers call bee space is very interesting. It's always very busy. There's always a lot going on. Wasps coming and going, doing different jobs on the nest. And this gives you a good chance to observe that in action. Even though most of the wasps have now been removed, there's still plenty of them just going about their business. So here we've collected quite a few wasps by now, and it's slowing down to the point where when we pause, we're not seeing very many come back out. So now we're moving into the next phase of this operation where we are going to start removing some wall material to expose more of the brood comb, because now we want to see what is the extent of this nest. How far does it go to the left and the right? How far does it go from the top and the bottom? So we're going to begin removing some wall material here. So here, after cutting this side of the wall, we're pausing a bit just to see if we get a response, if there's a lot more in there that are suddenly going to come flooding out. But we're not seeing much. But during this pause, we just want to see how much activity happens if we just let it sit for a moment after we did all that cutting and vibration. Because if there were still a lot of wasps between the combs, you would expect to see a bunch coming out. But we're not seeing that. So during the pause, it's a good point to just assess where you're at in this process and figure out if it's a good time to pull another piece of wall. And it appears to be, because we're not seeing much reaction.
They chewed away all that insulation, all that drywall.
Here we're discussing how much of that material they chewed away. You can see where this used to be covered by insulation and plastic and plaster and paint. All of that's gone. Now some of that was chewed away most likely by the rat, but the rest of it was all chewed away by the wasps themselves. They can get through just about any building material. So as you can see here, we only took away a small amount of material from the left side of the wall space. That's because you never know how big that nest is. You take the least amount of material possible to discover what you need to see behind it. And here, sure enough, they had already come up against the left side border of their nest, because there you have a big board that they were butted up against. So we had no need to take more wall than that. We could see the left-hand border. Now we're just collecting a few wasps that are coming forward, and then we'll be assessing how far the right side border goes and removing some material away as we do some exploratory cuts on that side. And then we do the same thing to figure out how high and how low it goes vertically and assess whether or not we have to remove material above or below. Ideally, we will not have to, because we'll just be able to take the combs out and reach down or reach up to get them out, because you want to do the least amount of damage interior to the structure as you possibly can. So for the next couple of minutes here, we're going to just show you what we observed inside this wasp nest, in between the layers of comb, what the wasps are up to in there, and we'll just let you see what we saw as we observed. It's very interesting, the engineering on these layers of nest. Wasps will create their own glue, kind of a biopolymer that's very, very strong, and the stalks you see in between these layers of comb are covered in that material. They're very tough, very strong, and that holds up that entire layer like a pillar would inside an apartment building, just pillars and beams that hold up all that weight. As we move in closer here, you'll see that the larvae in their cells hang upside down with their head facing the ground, and this is the way they develop in nature. The white silk caps you see on some of the cells are woven by the larvae that have gone into pupation. So the larvae themselves create kind of a gel in these glands inside their mouths, and that gel is strung across the top of their cell, and it becomes a very tough silk thread as soon as it hits oxygen. So once that cell is covered over in a silk thread cap, then the wasp will pupate for a couple of weeks, and when they're done pupating, they chew their way out of that, and they are an adult wasp. They basically use this silk cap and the cell itself as a cocoon. They go through full metamorphosis during their developmental stages. So they start out as an egg, the egg hatches into an immature larva, the larva grows until it's old enough to pupate, then it weaves a silk cap, then it stays inside the silk cap covered cell for a couple of weeks more, and then it chews its way out as an adult wasp. There might be several rounds of life in the nest, and they just keep cycling through the cells. So once a cell vacates, they clean it up, then the queen lays another egg in it, and the queen has the amazing ability to decide which type of egg she wants to lay. She can lay one of 3 different types of eggs. It could be a female worker, it could be a new queen, or it could be a male, a drone. So she can control that as needed based on the population requirements in the nest at the time. So after pausing and observing a little bit, we are now preparing to cut away the right side material of that wall space to see how far this nest goes to the right. We want to have the least amount of wasp traffic during that cut, so we're just cleaning up whatever wasps we can reach and getting them collected here for a minute. You'll notice that the cut technique we use is that we follow the cut with the vacuum in real time. So we hold the saw in the right hand, we hold the vacuum in the left, and they move together through the whole cut. That way there's no dust. This is all about dust control. We don't want to breathe the dust, and we don't want to leave dust to clean up, and we don't want it covering all the client's belongings. So the easiest thing to do is just prevent the dust from the beginning by following your cutting device with the vacuum tube so that there is no dust to clean up. And the tool we're using is called a multi-tool or a oscillating saw, and that is hands down the best tool, the most surgical device you could possibly use for this type of work. It's safe and easy to control. Here we're just showing you an example of how much plaster these wasps have chewed away from this plaster board. If you turn it in profile on the left side, you see the giant divot, and you can see how much of that thickness they have chewed right out of that board. So once we took away more of the right side of the wall, you could see plastic again and a little bit more fiberglass. So we knew we were getting toward the end of the right side border of this nest because they had not yet chewed away all of that fiberglass and plastic and material. And now we could start to see the right side edges of these brood combs that are all stacked going up and down. So here we're just starting to probe around the nest and push away some of the fiberglass and the material just to make sure we're looking at the complete edges of these brood combs. Each comb layer has a specific shape of its own. They are not uniform, so they are built to be filling whatever space the wasps decided to fill. So you can't really depend on one comb representing any of the other combs. They're all a different size, a different shape, depending on what space they're wedged into. So here we're just taking our time. We pause, we observe, we collect. We pause, we observe, we collect whatever comes out. We just want to make sure that we're not causing a swarm anywhere in that cavity by anything we're doing. We're moving slowly and deliberately with control.
That's so good. And as they keep coming in from outside, we're sucking them up from in here, and we're sucking them up from outside where they're entering the building. This way we're using the nest to lure them in. The nest itself is the best way to get them all into one concentrated area.
So here we're just reiterating that the nest itself is the best lure. It draws every single wasp from that colony right to the nest. As long as you leave it undisturbed, it will become a great lure and remain that throughout the whole removal. So every wasp trying to get into the nest from the outside has to go past our first vacuum, and they get collected in that process. And those that actually get past that vac and get into the cavity space where the nest is, they face this vacuum. So getting them from both sides is the best way to control it. So here we're preparing a bin to take the comb pieces that we're about to pull out of the wall cavity. Now that we know where the left hand and the right hand border are, now it's just a matter of assessing how high up into the wall and how down low into the wall do these stacks of brood comb exist. So we're going to begin removing them and pulling them out, putting them in the bin, keeping as many together as we can, which we can't take all of them and keep them intact because there's just not a good working space for that. But we can at least keep a few of them together. We always want to try to lift out as much of the intact nest as possible. And if you can't get the whole thing, you get the largest chunks that you can and keep them together. That way any wasps that are still inside the brood comb layers aren't going to flee and run all over the place. They're going to stay right in those layers, and you can just transfer them to an enclosed bin. So here we're just doing one more vacuuming to get it prepared to pull the brood comb out and into the bin. So we do a pause, we wait for more to come forward, we vacuum some more. We're just getting as much of the population as possible contained before we move the brood comb. You'll notice if you've been watching this video, almost no wasps have gotten past us. And those that have are in an enclosed closet that we can pick up later very easily. And you'll see in a minute here when we pull the brood comb out why that is so important. Because even though we've been vacuuming for an extended period of time and reduced a lot of the population, as soon as we remove the brood comb, there's a whole bunch more wasp in there. And there would be a lot more than that had we not done such a controlled removal. So as you can see here, we're collecting all of the remaining wasps that we can reach that were in the upper part of the nest. There's still a significant portion of comb below this piece of wood you see at the lower part of the frame. So right now we're just dealing with collecting what was left above those combs. And there wasn't that many left in there. It was not that hard to control that number of wasps because there simply wasn't that many left in the nest, because we had done a lot of collection early on, and that's the point. We don't want to have to chase them around now. We want a lot of that to be done in advance, and it was. And here you can see that very large void space inside the wall cavity that used to be filled with fiberglass. Now it was all filled with comb, and then we removed the comb so you can see that space now. They had removed a huge amount of fiberglass insulation and all the paper around that insulation, as well as any of the drywall that was in the way when they started expanding the nest outward into the closet. But the amount of material they removed is remarkable. Every time we see that, it's amazing. So here we take the camera and we try to take a look at the interior of this nest cavity, and we can see paper. And that's a good sign, because typically if you're seeing the paper envelope, that means you've reached the edge of where there was nest brood comb. So we have pulled out all of the brood comb that was in the upper part of the nest, and now what you're looking at is the ceiling, so to speak, of the wasp nest, where they put paper covering over all of the brood comb. So we have now reached the limit of the upper part of the nest. And you can see the brood comb from the lower part of the nest in the lower part of the frame. And how much is down there remains to be seen. But right now we're just doing collection of wasps to make sure we can control the population movement before we go after that lower part of the nest and try to retrieve that. Here we just take a minute to clean up the phone cam. It had a lot of debris on it. We wanted to make sure we were getting a clear shot. So we're vacuuming off the phone, some of the lens, and just getting some of the fiberglass and nest debris off of that. Here we're discussing how the wasps have created paper all around the nest cavity wherever there was a hole. So in the eaves cavity, there was a huge space that they had to cover with a giant wall of paper, and that's what you see in the back of the nest. This was basically the back wall of the nest envelope, the paper envelope, and they fill in any gaps or any seams where there's light or draft or air that they don't want coming in to help regulate the temperature of the nest inside the brood comb. It's called thermoregulation. That's the process that this paper helps them go through to make sure there's enough ventilation and fresh air and the proper temperature to raise their brood. It's incredible engineering, and they can keep the temperature at a very specific temp throughout the whole season just by adding and removing this paper. So when it comes to removals, we have to remove all of the paper that they installed all around this nest. So here we're just vacuuming up most of the wasps that we see to continue to control the wasp population during the removal, but then we have to start dismantling all of that paper and collecting it all and getting it out of there. So a little at a time, we are deconstructing this huge complex paper ball that they made all around their brood comb. And as you can see, as you look around this workspace, there's no giant swarm of wasps. There's nothing coming out of that nest that we can't control easily within an arm's reach. And when you're working in somebody's living space, inside their house, this is the key factor in every removal like this. You have to make sure you maintain control, take it slow, be very regimented in what you do so that you don't end up bringing more wasps into their house that you have to chase all over the place. Here you can see where they put more paper into every gap. They filled every gap around that cavity space that they didn't want to have open. So up above you see paper, below you see paper, in the back you see paper. It literally is surrounding that entire brood cavity. And there's a lot of nooks and crannies in there where the wasp can hide. So we just keep it open for a while, let them walk in toward the light and collect them all. So while we pause at the cavity space, we open up the bin and we collect all the wasps in this bin. And that's what we're going to do here. We're just going to collect all the wasps on these brood combs. A lot of these are males, some of them are new queens, there's a few workers, and rather than try to pick and choose and sort them and all for venom immunotherapy, it's just far more efficient when you're working inside somebody's house to just get all of this into the vac, as we discussed before. So that's what we're doing here. We're just going through this entire brood comb selection and getting rid of all the wasps on it, all the live wasps. That way when we take these back to incubate them off-site in our vespiary, there'll be nothing but brood comb, and everything that hatches out of that brood comb will be clean and fresh and new, and we can collect those for venom immunotherapy in a controlled environment. And here we're about to pull the lower half of the nest brood comb out of the wall. So we were going to put that in the same bin, and when we open up the bin and we put in more brood comb, we didn't want a lot of wasps flying around. So it's another reason to just collect them out of the bin before we start this process. As you can see here, all of these lower brood combs were queen cells, very large larvae, large cells, and these would become next year's queens. Had we let them hatch out, there would have been hundreds of new queens coming out of this nest, and they would have come out of the nest, gone out and mated, and then hibernated over winter, and then started their own nest somewhere else in the spring. So we can only imagine how many different wasp nests and how many different wasps would have been born out of all of these nests had we not interrupted the process here. Fortunately, we can hatch out all of these queens in a vespiary environment and collect a lot of them for venom immunotherapy. So they don't go to waste. All of this brood comb is saved and incubated back at our base, where we can then use them all for biomedical venom immunotherapy. So we knew, now that we were getting into the queen brood comb, that there couldn't be very many layers left down into the wall. They were becoming smaller, and they were all queen brood. That's how you know you're coming to the end of a nest. This had been a very large nest. There were several pounds of wasp brood in that bin. When we looked down into the space, we saw one or two more small brood combs. As you see here, the back of the brood comb down at the bottom of this space, but otherwise it was all paper. And so we now see the entire paper enclosure up above here. We're looking at the top of the paper enclosure, And here we're looking back down at the bottom of the nest, and you can see all the paper enclosure down there, and one or two very small combs down in this lower part of the nest. So that was the entire nest cavity. Now we're going to try to pull out whatever comb is left. This turned out to be the last one, a bunch of very large queen larvae that had not capped off yet. No silk caps had been woven yet, so this was the newest comb on the nest. And you can see the size of these cells, very large cells, very large larvae. These would have been more queens. So if you look at all of this brood comb, that was a huge nest. They were populating out lots of wasps, so it was good to get this thing out of this elderly couple's house. So now we knew we had the entire nest removed. All of the brood was out. Now it was a matter of cleaning up all of the envelope paper and all of the leftover wasps that were still wandering around looking for their brood comb. And there were a good number of those inside the cavity, but nothing compared to what we had already vacuumed up. We had vacuumed up thousands of wasps already, and that saved us a lot of hassle at this stage. Had we not taken the time to vacuum up all of those wasps off the comb before we dismantled the nest, this cavity space would be filled with wasps, thousands of them running around, trying to escape, trying to jump through the paper into the other cavity spaces inside the eaves, and that would have made this stage of the follow-up cleanup that much harder. But here, there's only a few wasps to collect and the paper, and we could just take our time, go through, and try to find all that paper and get rid of it. Unfortunately, it was such a tight space, an awkward space to work. We're up on a step stool here. We're trying to reach way up, high up into this whole cavity in the wall, and it was difficult to reach all of that. So we couldn't see most of the workspace we were working in. All we could do was reach the phone cam up inside that space, shoot some imagery blind, kind of move the phone around, assuming we're catching images of the 360-degree space in there, and then review all that footage to know whether or not we needed to clean up more by reaching around some more and pushing the vacuum wherever we could reach. So we're kind of working blind with the phone camera video footage as a guide. So this phase is very important. You have to make sure you collect every last wasp you can reach. You have to make sure you don't miss too many different parts of the nest that maybe you couldn't see. And so the imagery that we capture with the phone is super important. So we move slowly and we move carefully. We film everything inside that cavity that we can reach, and then we review everything, and we go in and we very carefully remove anything that we saw on the video footage. So for the rest of the cleanup, we're going to put it on 4x fast forward just to show you the process here. So in this footage, you can see inside, past the back wall of paper that we removed, you can see all of that rat nest material, all that straw and plant material that had been dried. That's all rat nest in there from where this rat had gotten into that eave space and built a nest that eventually chewed through the wall into that closet prior to the wasp nest being there. And this whole area was not accessible to us. We couldn't get in there with any real gear to clean up everything, but we could reach in there just enough to get all of the live wasps we found collected. But every piece of paper was impossible to remove from the angle that we had to work with without really just removing an entire wall of shelving and an entire wall of drywall and all of that. We weren't about to do any demolition like that. So it just wasn't necessary. As you can see here, just about every bit of the wasp nest in the lower part of the nest is what we're looking at here had been removed. We got just about every wasp out of there. There's a few stragglers in every removal. They starve out on their own. We don't have to worry about them. But generally speaking, this area had all been cleaned up, except for the rat nest material in the back. And we could see rat nest material. We could see old wasp nests in the background in different parts of the eaves, but there were none that were active, no more wasps, and that was the main thing we were looking for. We also wanted to make sure that this elderly couple didn't have more live rats in that space in the back, and we didn't see any rats. There was no fresh dung. There was no indication that there was any more rodent activity in there, and that was good. They were getting up there in years, and they did not have the ability to maintain this type of difficult-to-reach space in their house. From here, it was just a matter of drawing more of the wasp in toward the light, vacuuming all of them up as we could reach them, and just putting in the work and the time it took to do that. Eventually, all of that got done, and as you can see here, we cleaned up the entire closet space that had been filled with so many wasps when we first arrived. It was now all cleaned up. The entire nest was removed. We got as much of the paper out of there and as many of the adult flying wasps that we could find. And so we were pretty confident now that this job was coming to a close. And we could very confidently tell the client that this nest was no longer going to be a problem for them. The next thing we did was we referred them to a couple of local contractors who can help them repair all their drywall. They had another contractor coming out to work on sealing up the whole porch so they couldn't get any more queens in next spring. That exclusion of spring queens is the only way to prevent this from happening again. So then we went back out to the porch to check on the collection there, and that was going just fine. We brought the brood comb out to get it put into the vehicle, and we checked on the last of the wasps that were trying to enter from the outside. There was no more swarm. We had collected 2 or 3 bottles of wasps already from the outside. And then we went back inside here just to follow up, collect any more stragglers. We found a couple of stragglers here and there, but almost nothing left at all in there. We're looking here down into the lower part of the nest, and you can see down there was a couple of stragglers hiding out in one crevice at the very lowest part of where the nest used to be. So at this point we realized we're going to have to just get the hose down in there because we couldn't reach down there. It was inaccessible. Only the camera could see down there. So we just shoved the hose down in there as far as we could, and we left it running for several minutes straight in that particular space. And we could feel them coming up through the hose getting collected because they sort of clink through there like you're vacuuming up small pieces of gravel. You can feel them coming up into the hose, and we just ran that until there was no more of that happening, and then everything was out. So we did a visual inspection with the camera by just shoving the camera as far deep into that space as we could, and we didn't see any more live wasps anywhere. The paper that we couldn't reach, which you see here, which is over near where the rat nest material was, we couldn't even get our hands on that. This is only what the camera could see. And as we went through the last of the inspection, there was almost nothing left in there as far as wasps go. Every now and then there'll be 1 or 2 you could see in a distance that we couldn't reach. But in general, this wasp nest was done. These last few wasps that you see, people often ask, well, are they going to rebuild? The answer is no. All the straggler wasps will die because without the brood comb that you see here that we had before we removed it, without all that larvae producing fluids that the wasps will drink, the adult wasps drink the fluid that the larvae produce, without that, they die. They starve out, and they will die attempting to find their old nest. They will die in the cavity, and there was only a handful of them left that would do that. And that's just the way it goes. We don't use sprays of any kind, no poisons, because they're not necessary. These wasps are doomed. They cannot live. Any leftover wasps, you do not have to spray poison in these cavities, in these living spaces that this elderly couple lived in. So what we ended up doing was, once everything had been cleaned out, we closed up the hole with cardboard and taped it up so nothing can walk out of there. They just starve in the cavity. And then the contractors can come in and close up that wall, and they can seal up the porch from the outside along with the rest of the house. And this elderly couple can finally rest assured this problem is done.